At 11:30 on the morning of August 16th, 1942, residents of Daly City, California, looked up and saw something that did not make sense. A United States Navy blimp was drifting over their rooftops. It was flying low, too low. Its envelope sagged. A line trailed beneath it, scraping across buildings and utility wires. People ran into the street. Drivers stopped. Firefighters and police began moving towards the falling airship as it descended across Bellevue Avenue and came to rest among houses and parked cars. They expected to find wounded sailors inside. They found no one. The control car was empty. The door was open. The radio was still aboard. The parachutes were still there. The life raft was still there. The aircraft had not been shot to pieces. There had been no distress call. About 5.5 hours earlier, 2 Navy officers had taken off in that same blimp. Neither of them was ever seen again. That is what makes the L-8 case so unsettling. The aircraft did not vanish. It returned in full view of the coast. The machine survived. The men disappeared. To understand how strange that was, we have to return to the beginning of that Sunday morning, when nothing about the flight seemed unusual. The date was August 16th, 1942. The United States had been at war for only 8 months. Pearl Harbor was still a recent wound, and the California coast did not feel safely removed from the Pacific conflict. Japanese submarines had already operated off the American west coast. In February, the submarine I-17 had shelled the Elwood oil field near Santa Barbara. Reports of enemy submarines, coastal attacks, blackouts and alerts had turned stretches of California shoreline into a defensive frontier. The ocean beyond the Golden Gate was not just open water. It was a place the Navy believed an enemy might be hiding. So the Navy watched it constantly. Some of that watching was done by aircraft that looked almost absurdly slow for a modern war. Blimps. Their slowness was not a weakness in this role. It was an advantage. A fixed-wing patrol plane had to keep moving. A blimp could remain over one area, descend toward the surface, circle a suspicious object, and stay in the air for hours. It could operate at low altitude and beneath cloud ceilings that might limit other aircraft. For anti-submarine patrol work, patience mattered. Airship Patrol Squadron 32, designated ZP-32, had been organized on the West Coast earlier that year. Among the aircraft placed into Navy service was L-8, a non-rigid helium airship that had begun its life with Goodyear. Before the war, aircraft like this belonged to advertising and public aviation. By 1942, L-8 was carrying Navy crews along one of the most sensitive coastlines in the country. It was roughly 150 feet long, held aloft by helium and powered by 2 engines beneath its envelope. Suspended below that massive silver hull was a compact control car, where the crew worked only a few feet apart. L-8 had already taken part in a remarkable moment of wartime history. 4 months earlier, it had flown out to the aircraft carrier USS Hornet as the carrier moved through the Pacific with 16 B-25 bombers on deck. L-8 delivered equipment connected to the force preparing for what would become the Doolittle raid against Japan. The pilot associated with that mission was Lieutenant Junior Grade Ernest DeWitt Cody. Cody was 27 years old, a 1938 graduate of the United States Naval Academy. By 1942, he had accumulated hundreds of hours in lighter-than-air aircraft, and his commanders regarded him as a skilled and reliable airship pilot. The man flying with him that August morning was older and had even more experience around airships. Ensign Charles Ellis Adams had served aboard the Navy's giant rigid airship, USS Macon. In 1935, Macon went down off the California coast. Adams survived. 7 years later, Adams was again flying over the California coast in a Navy airship. This time, the airship would come back. Adams would not. There was one unusual detail about the patrol. Adams had only recently been commissioned as an ensign. This would be his first patrol flight as an officer. And there was almost a third man aboard. Aviation machinist mate, 3rd class, James Riley Hill, had been expected to join the flight. He was present during preparations and initially intended to go. But shortly before departure, Cody told him to get off the blimp. Later accounts indicate weight was the reason. In a lighter-than-air aircraft, every pound mattered. A routine operational decision made before sunrise removed Hill from the flight. Had Cody made a different decision that morning, the L-8 mystery might have involved 3 missing men instead of 2. At 6:03 a.m., L-8 lifted away from Treasure Island in San Francisco Bay. The mission was routine.
The planned route would carry L-8 west toward the Farallon Islands, then along the coastal patrol area before returning towards San Francisco. Winds were light. The sky was overcast, but visibility was workable. There was no violent storm and no obvious warning that anything was wrong. For roughly 90 minutes, nothing was. At 7:38 a.m., Cody radioed a position report. L-8 was several miles east of the Farallons. Then came the message that has remained attached to the case ever since. Am investigating suspicious oil slick. Stand by. In wartime, an oil slick could not be dismissed casually. It might mean nothing, a trace left by an ordinary vessel, or it might mean something was moving beneath the surface. L-8 descended to investigate. 2 nearby vessels now became witnesses to the last confirmed period in which Cody and Adams were known to be aboard their aircraft: the Liberty ship Albert Gallatin and the fishing vessel Daisy Gray. The blimp circled the slick. Smoke markers were dropped onto the water. At times, L-8 flew extremely low, close enough for men aboard the fishing vessel to see 2 figures in the control car. That detail matters because later versions often place the disappearance at the oil slick itself, as if the crew suddenly encountered an enemy vessel or some other violent event. But the witnesses did not report anything like that. They saw no gunfire, no submarine surfaced, no vessel approached the blimp, and no one saw Cody or Adams leave the gondola. They saw a Navy blimp performing what looked like a careful investigation, and then they watched it stay. For more than an hour, L-8 continued circling. It did not release its depth charges. No dramatic discovery was reported. Most strangely, there was no second radio message explaining what the crew had found. Then, shortly after 9 o'clock, witnesses watched the blimp gain altitude and head back toward the mainland. Cody and Adams had been seen aboard during the investigation. After that, reliable observation of the men ends. From this point forward, history can still follow L-8. It can no longer follow the men. Back at Navy Control, repeated attempts to contact L-8 received no reply. At first, silence did not automatically mean disaster. Radio contact with blimps could be imperfect, and L-8 had ample fuel. By 8:20, Squadron Headquarters had been told that L-8 was no longer responding. At 8:50, 2 Navy Kingfisher aircraft were sent to look for it. The timeline now develops an unsettling overlap. Offshore witnesses were still observing L-8 around this period, apparently with both men aboard, while Navy Control had already begun treating its silence as a problem. Then, almost 2 hours after the last confirmed sighting of Cody and Adams, L-8 appeared again. At 10:49 a.m., a Pan American Clipper pilot reported seeing the blimp near the Golden Gate. From a distance, nothing seemed obviously catastrophic. Around 11 o'clock, a Navy search aircraft saw L-8 at roughly 2,000 feet. That altitude may be one of the most important clues in the entire case. 2,000 feet was not just an altitude. It was close to the airship's pressure height, the point at which expanding helium could cause automatic valves to vent gas and protect the envelope. A blimp remains aloft because the helium in its envelope provides lift. If a substantial amount of weight suddenly disappears from the control car, the aircraft becomes lighter. It rises. As it rises, the helium expands. Near pressure height, gas can vent automatically. If enough helium escapes, the same blimp that climbed because it became too light can later lose enough lift to become heavy and descend. That sequence helps explain something witnesses would soon notice. By the time L-8 approached land, its envelope was no longer taut, it was sagging. The aircraft's later behavior could be explained by physics. The disappearance of its crew could not. By late morning, people near the coast began noticing the airship approaching Ocean Beach, south of San Francisco. It was low. It was unstable.
For the first time since L-8 had disappeared into the coastal haze, people were about to get close enough to see inside. There was no one there. The blimp came down near the beach and struck an embankment. One engine and propeller were damaged. One of its heavy depth charges was knocked from the rack. Then the story took another turn. The loss of that weight made L-8 lighter again. The blimp lifted back into the air. Now the mystery was drifting over neighborhoods. Golfers stopped and stared. Drivers pulled over. Residents came out of their homes. People followed the airship as it moved slowly inland. Some photographed it. Others later said they believed they saw figures in the gondola. One witness reported seeing what appeared to be a parachute. Those statements became part of the legend. But the surviving clues created problems for those accounts.
The parachutes assigned to L-8 were later found aboard the aircraft. No confirmed crewman was seen descending, and people who had reached the blimp near the beach had already described the gondola as empty. For a brief moment, Navy personnel even believed the mystery might have been solved. A report reached the squadron that 2 men had left the blimp when it touched down, but the report was mistaken. The men were civilians who had tried to grab the airship and keep it on the ground. Cody and Adams were still missing. L-8 drifted on. By the time it reached Daly City, its return had become a slow-motion public spectacle. The envelope sagged lower. The control car descended among houses. A trailing line caught roofs and utility cables. The blimp clipped structures, struck wires, and finally settled onto Bellevue Avenue at about 11:30 that morning. Police officers, firefighters, and residents converged on the wreck. They expected to find the crew injured, perhaps unconscious, perhaps trapped inside. Instead, they found an aircraft without pilots. And investigators suddenly had something they almost never have in a disappearance involving aviation. They had the machine. Usually, if a pilot disappears with an aircraft, the first mystery is where the wreckage went. Here, the aircraft had delivered itself back to investigators. The gondola, equipment, and controls could all be examined. Every object left aboard could become a clue. And yet the more investigators established, the stranger the absence became. The radio remained with the aircraft. There had been no known distress transmission after the oil slick message. The parachutes were still aboard. So was the life raft. Sensitive material had not been thrown away. The life jackets associated with Cody and Adams were missing, but that was expected. Navy procedure required the men to wear them during overwater operations. The door of the control car was found secured open. A microphone connected to the aircraft's external loudspeaker system was reportedly hanging near that doorway. There were no convincing signs of an onboard fire, no confirmed sign of hostile gunfire, no battle damage that explained the disappearance. Investigators also found no persuasive indication that the gondola had plunged into the ocean. One detail, cited in later Navy accounts, was remarkably simple. Dust in a low compartment beneath the deck remained dry. If the control car had been submerged in seawater, that would have been difficult to explain. Even some of the most repeated details in popular versions of the story turned out to be less reliable than they sounded. For years, retellings claimed that investigators found warm coffee or a half-eaten sandwich aboard, creating the image of 2 men vanishing in the middle of breakfast. Those details appear repeatedly in later retellings, but they are not established in the Navy accounts and investigative material on which the case can reliably be reconstructed. The verified record was already strange enough. The Navy searched the sea. Aircraft searched from above. Ships, Coast Guard personnel, police, and civilians looked for the missing officers. Nothing conclusively belonging to either man was recovered. No confirmed body. No verified personal equipment. No final message. No witness who could identify the moment they left the aircraft. 2 days after the disappearance, a formal Navy investigation began. Witnesses were interviewed, the airship examined, and possible mechanical or human causes considered. The board found no sign of fire, no proof of submersion, no hostile projectiles, and no convincing indication of misconduct. It found no reason to believe Cody and Adams had intentionally abandoned the aircraft, and it could not identify a mechanical failure that explained why both men were gone. The inquiry's conclusion was cautious, but important. After reviewing the surviving record, the board believed the abandonment had been involuntary.
But involuntary only described what investigators believed about the men's intentions. It did not explain what happened. The wartime setting produced dramatic possibilities almost immediately. Could the oil slick have come from a Japanese submarine? Could Cody and Adams have encountered an enemy vessel? Could they have been captured? Could someone else have boarded the blimp? Later retellings added espionage, secret operations, and increasingly elaborate conspiracy theories. None of those versions is supported by what investigators could verify. There is no confirmed record of an enemy attack on L-8. The airship returned without the kind of combat damage that would explain 2 missing crewmen. The nearby vessels did not report a submarine surfacing beside it. No witness reported an enemy boarding, and the Navy investigation found nothing establishing hostile involvement. Deliberate disappearance is difficult to support for another reason. Cody and Adams left behind their parachutes. They left the life raft. They left sensitive material. Investigators found no indication that either man had been planning to disappear, and any planned escape would have required them to vanish in daylight, over waters being watched by fishing boats, merchant ships, military patrols, and coastal observers. Possible in theory, unsupported by the record. That left one explanation that experienced Navy airship officers regarded as the most plausible: an accident. Not a finding, not a solved sequence of events, a reconstruction, and it was never proved. The most plausible reconstruction begins with the open door. 8 is operating low above the Pacific. One crewman may be using the doorway to observe the water, handle a smoke marker, check something outside, or communicate with a vessel below. The inquiry specifically considered whether the door's safety latch was adequate, and whether it could have been released accidentally. Suppose one man loses his footing. The second reacts instantly. For perhaps a few seconds, this does not yet feel like a disaster. It feels like a rescue. The remaining crewman leaves the controls and moves toward the doorway. Then he's gone too. And at that instant, the later behavior of L-8 begins to make sense. The blimp, suddenly relieved of the weight of 2 adults, becomes too light. It climbs. With no one at the controls, it continues upward towards pressure height. The helium expands. Gas vents. Lift gradually falls. The unmanned aircraft drifts back toward the California coast. Eventually, it descends. The physics is coherent. What happened to the men is not. If one man fell first, why did the other not make even a short radio call? If he tried to rescue his crewmate, why was the life raft not released? If both men were lost almost at the same moment, how did it happen without anyone on nearby vessels seeing them fall? And then there is a deeper problem. The last confirmed sighting of both men appears to have come after the blimp had already spent a long time circling the suspicious oil slick. Witnesses then saw L-8 rise and turn toward the mainland. That means the disappearance may not have happened at the oil slick at all. It may have happened later, somewhere between the offshore witnesses who saw 2 men aboard and the later aircraft sightings near the coast. L-8 became empty. That smaller interval is the true center of the mystery. A narrow window in which a functioning Navy aircraft went from carrying 2 experienced airmen to carrying no one at all. We know what happened before that window. We know what happened after it. Inside it, the record breaks, and the eyewitness accounts that seem to offer a solution often make the case more confusing. Some people on land believed they saw figures inside the gondola late in the flight. One witness reportedly thought there were 3 people. Others said they saw something that looked like a parachute. But every parachute assigned to the blimp was recovered with it. No third person was ever established. No crewman was found beneath the root. Eyewitness testimony can feel more immediate than physical clues. But human observation is fragile. A hanging object behind a window can become a person. A loose line can become a parachute. An airship glimpsed through haze for only a few seconds can become a memory that feels sharper, not weaker, as decades pass. The most reliable clues are quieter. The open door, the empty control car, the missing crew, the flotation gear apparently gone with them, the untouched parachutes, the unused life raft, the absence of a distress call, the lack of confirmed enemy damage, the unexplained climb, and then the long silence afterward. In 1943, Cody and Adams were legally declared dead, but the official conclusion never became a complete answer. No investigation established exactly how they left the blimp. Nothing verified an enemy encounter. Nothing established a deliberate disappearance. And no accident reconstruction could answer every question. Modern Navy historical accounts still describe their fate as unresolved. L-8, however, had a very different future. The Navy repaired it. The aircraft that had landed without its crew went back into service. After the war, its control car returned to Goodyear and was later used as part of another blimp named America. That detail is almost surreal. The same small gondola at the center of a wartime disappearance later flew again above a country that had already begun to move on. The war ended. Treasure Island changed. Daly City grew. The witnesses aged. Theories multiplied. But the object at the center of the mystery survived. Today, the control car associated with L-8 is preserved at the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, restored in its wartime configuration.
You can still stand near the same cabin from which two men somehow vanished. And that is what makes this case different from so many disappearances at sea. There is no missing wreck waiting to be found on the ocean floor. No unknown crash site still holding the answer. The blimp came back. Its equipment came back. Its parachutes came back. Its life raft came back. Even the gondola survived long enough to become a museum artifact. Only the two men did not. The simplest explanation remains an accident over the Pacific. One sudden emergency. One instinctive attempt to help. Two men lost before either could call for assistance. It requires no submarine attack or conspiracy. But even that reconstruction goes beyond what can actually be established. Plausible is still not known, because history is not solved by the explanation that sounds best. It is solved by what the surviving record can establish. And here, the record stops, just before the most important moment. Somewhere between the time L-8 turned away from a suspicious patch of water and the moment an empty airship appeared again near San Francisco, something happened inside that small control car. Maybe it lasted a minute, maybe less than 10 seconds. Whatever happened, two experienced Navy officers vanished from an aircraft that continued flying without them across one of the busiest wartime coastlines in America. More than 8 decades later, the blimp can still be examined. The men cannot, and the last confirmed message from L-8 remains suspended over the Pacific, like an instruction no one was ever able to complete. Stand by.